Hello, I'm Alan Kohler, Editor-at-Large of Intelligent Investor and the finance presenter and columnist for the ABC.
And I'm Stephen Mayne, contributor at Intelligent Investor, founder of Crikey and shareholder activist.
And we are...
The Money Café, Alan.
What have you been up to,
How are you,
Stephen?
boss?
I'm good.
Oh, what have I been up to? Well, I've actually been quite exercised by the passing of Anna Murdoch for some reason this week. I just find the whole Murdoch situation fascinating. You know, they were married for 31 years. They met when she was a cadet at the Daily Mirror in the 1960s. She was on the News Corp board for 8 years, and then he just gave her the punt. And all sorts of crazy stuff has happened since then. And I've sort of been pondering, if only Rupert had stuck with Anna after 31 years of marriage, done another 27 years, the whole world would have been, well, the whole News Corp world would have been potentially quite different. And you wouldn't have a situation where Rupert's 6 kids are all multi-billionaires and they're all richer than him.
He obviously decided he only lives once, and even if it is for a long time, and, well, you know, he's got to, he wants to have other women, obviously. That's what he decided.
Because at his mother's funeral, he got up and said, she was so devoted to my father, Sir Keith, that she stayed single and never married again for 60 years after he died. So he was talking up, you know, that sort of loyalty. Anyway, I just think it's amazing. And look, it's been a week now since she passed. The family has not said a word, which I just find amazing. Like normally you have public tributes, and so they're so split. You know,
not even her children. I haven't noticed this. Have her children not even said anything?
No one has. It was announced through the New York Post. There's a furniture store in Palm Beach, which sort of did the announcement locally in Palm Beach, Florida. And none of the family. So I've actually written to Rupert's PR people and said, can you just make a statement? Because I've got all these statements of everything he said about everyone else who's died. You know, when Roger Ailes died, when Larry Lamb died. He's given all these tributes to all these people over the years, and I've added them all up. And yet he can't say a single word when the mother of 3 of his kids, ex-News Corp director, 31 years of marriage. And, yeah, so it's just an amazing family drama.
Don't tell me they've ignored you, Stephen.
Well, I'm waiting to hear back, but it's quite an interesting list when you list all the things, all the tributes he's given to everyone over the years, and can't get a word out of him on Anna. So the other interesting thing was I went up to Sydney last week for the Aristocrat AGM, the big pokies manufacturer, and they'd spent $45 million in legal fees suing their competitor, Light & Wonder. That came out at the AGM. They had a big settlement.
I presume, by the way, I presume they didn't pay for your airfares, did they?
No. It's funny, when I ran for their board 3 years ago, they did pay for my airfares to go up and be interviewed by the chair. But no, not this time. But my first question was, are we still giving a free car to our 102-year-old billionaire founder, Len Ainsworth, even though he doesn't drive anymore?
And the answer
they said, no, not anymore. It stopped recently. So that was news, because he used to get a new Porsche or a new Rolls Royce every 3 years. Well, they just said, no, we've stopped recently. So
when he was 101?
Well, possibly, yeah. So because he's a billionaire in his own right. So he doesn't need it. And then I got him to admit that the family still owns about 15% of the company, because when Len handed over his shares to his 7 sons, he said, if any of you sell, I'll sue you, and you've got to give me 80% of the proceeds. One of them did sell, and he did sue him and got 80% of the proceeds. So when he does die, there's going to be this avalanche of Aristocrat shares that are going to hit the market, because all these sons haven't been able to sell because the old man demands the stock when they do sell. And it's 15% of the company, but it's not announced. They don't announce it as one big holding. They pretend they're all separate.
What basis has he got for demanding 80% of the... Is it in some sort of agreement?
It's in the agreement. When he gifted the shares to his sons, he said, if you ever sell, you've got to give me 80% of the proceeds as long as I'm alive. And he's the first billionaire to get to 100. So when he does... It is an amazing story, yeah. So if he's no longer getting the free Porsche every 3 years, has he let his sons off and said, you can now sell? Or, you know, is he going to sue them at 102, just like Rupert sued his own kids at 94?
It was a free Porsche every 3 years.
Yeah. So, and he had Bentleys, Audis, you know, he was and fully maintained. So, but finally he said, no, I don't need it anymore. So, anyway, so that was all good fun. Now, what about you? Have you, Trump's about to give his State of the Union. We're talking at 8:20 on Wednesday morning. I mean, first, I guess we start with tariffs. What's your take on all of that? I mean, High Court win, Supreme Court win, but then he just bangs them on again, 10%, 15%, 10%. I mean, it just changes every day.
Yeah, so I suppose what it means is that the whole area of international trade is completely confused now. No one's got any idea what's going to happen because, does he have any basis now for doing it? I mean, he's talked about this Section 122, which allows him to put 15% tariffs on everybody, but it's only for 150 days. So nobody's really clear about what's going on. He keeps asserting that he's going to continue the tariffs and will be able to do so, but there's not really any certainty about that. So, I think that nobody knows, certainly not me, what's going to happen.
It is a substantial reduction in his power because this was the element of the law that he used most frequently, particularly with international. Like anyone would insult him or any minor thing had happened, he'd just go bang, international economic emergency provision, and on the tariff went. So he was using this particular device far more than any other. So it is a dramatic reduction in power. A lot of the other countries are now not going to sign or commit to their trade deals, I suspect, because he's lost this weapon. You've now got this big debate about he owes every American family $1,000, and this whole controversy of how do you repay $250 billion. He doesn't want to repay any of it. FedEx have just sued, saying give us our money back. So it's quite a mess, isn't it? But he's so dedicated to his tariffs. He's just like, this was a big chance to give everyone a tax cut. And so I'm going to give every family $1,000. Okay, we can't do it. Instead, he's just doubling down, looking for every possible way he can put new tariffs on.
And clearly the reason he loves the tariffs so much is, well, there's two reasons. One is that, as you say, it gives him a lot of power. He's able to, use them to get deals with other countries. And secondly, it enables him to raise taxes while saying that the American people aren't paying the taxes that's being paid by other countries. So it's sort of it's a double win for him, which is why he doesn't want to give them away.
And then we've got AI, which is, I'm going to call it the SaaS flash crash, because it really has been a bit of a tech wreck now. If you look at the size of some of the drops in the stocks, Atlassian, 70% plus. I mean, Atlassian, we used to talk about those two Sydney-based founders, each being worth $20 billion on our rich list. And now the whole company's not even worth $20 billion US, that is. So it has just been an absolute wipeout. And every day, IBM shares down 13% yesterday. And all of this is just on predictions, because none of these companies have actually reported a drop in profit, a loss of contracts. Like, it's all just prediction.
Yes, and Scott Farquhar and Michael Cannon-Brookes did manage to spend $100 million each or so on houses at Point Piper in Sydney before everything went pear-shaped, didn't they? So that was...
they'll be okay. They've taken enough off the table over the years. But
they'll be fine.
But
yeah, look, clearly what's happening is investors are shooting first and asking questions later. I mean, the issue of which particular software companies are going to be affected by AI is nowhere near resolved. I mean, it is unclear whether, for example, to what extent Salesforce will be affected. The IBM one was specific to Claude, Anthropic announcing that Claude can deal with COBOL, the computer language that's been around for, 60 years. And it's still in a fair bit of use, COBOL. Apparently it's 90% of ATMs use COBOL and so on. So apparently IBM makes a lot of money out of that, and now Claude is able to automate the COBOL in some way. So that was kind of what was behind the IBM one. But it isn't clear at all what AI will do to the software companies, but investors aren't hanging around waiting to find out.
It's people love an acronym. It's the HALO trade now. So you want to buy stocks that are heavy assets, light obsolescence. So that's a Caterpillar, a McDonald's, something with tangible assets that you can touch and feel and can't be replaced, and is light on for risk of obsolescence. So your Macca's, world's greatest restaurant property bank worth $330 billion. AI cannot destroy that. We've all got to eat. They own the physical assets. Property as an asset class is still globally larger than stocks. So, but anything which is just software or you can't touch it, it's relying on data, they are just getting wiped out. And it does feel like the tech wreck. And the other thing is the element of financial contagion. The fact that private equity and private credit is getting smashed at the same time, the Blackstones of the world, the Blue Owls, because people fear that their loans are going to go bad to a lot of these software companies, these light asset companies. That's where I think it's really, really interesting. It's not just going to be softwares, but it's the contagion, the flow-on effect, which is sort of like almost like the GFC. It was CDOs and property, and then it spread right through the financial system. So what do you think about the risk of financial contagion from an AI disruption point of view?
Well, I just don't know. I mean, clearly, if some lender is overextended to a software company that goes bust, they're obviously in trouble. I mean, it's just impossible to know. I mean, it was interesting that on Monday the fall in the software companies and the market generally was due to a blog post by a company called Citrini Research, which did I referred to this on the ABC News last night. It did a sort of a scenario analysis,
it was a novel. It was a novel, wasn't it? They were making up what the situation was going to be in 2028. So it was a novel / prediction piece.
That's right, but it wasn't. That's right. It was pretended to be written in June 2028 about what suddenly is going on, and the S&P 500 it proposed is down 38% from its 2026 highs. So that spooked everybody, but it's clearly, I mean, I've been reading lots of responses to it that have debunked it and have said that it's completely impossible to imagine that scenario. So, look, I suppose what's going on with AI is nobody really knows. It's just created this massive amount of uncertainty. Nobody really knows whether the AI companies themselves are going to make enough money to justify the investment they're making in data centers and GPUs, and nobody knows what impact it's going to have on software companies or on the level of employment. I mean, one of the things that the Citrini Research prediction was on about was the unemployment, although it did propose that unemployment in 2028 is 10.2%, which is, not that much. It's a recession level of unemployment, yes, but it's not like the level of unemployment that some of the AI people like Dario Amodei and Elon Musk and so on are predicting, which is that they take all white-collar jobs. But I suppose the thing is that 2028 is not that's only a couple of years in the future. Maybe in 5 years it takes all white-collar jobs. I don't know.
I just find the scale and the speed of the deals. It's not just the tech app sort of rollout side of things. I mean, just overnight, Facebook or Meta has done a massive deal with AMD, the chip manufacturer, which could include Facebook finishing up with 20% of the stock. So it's worth the whole deal's worth like 20 billion plus, and it goes as far as into warrants. So the more chips you deliver us, the more we can buy your shares. So it's a really long-term, all-in partnership. And AMD shares are up, 9% on the back of that deal. Suddenly their market cap's $350 billion US. I mean, it's nothing like Nvidia, which is at $4.7 trillion market cap, is the one unconditional clear winner from this whole chaos, and they're holding up absolutely brilliantly. Whereas poor old Microsoft, its market cap has crashed. It's only down to 2.88 trillion. It's lost. It was a $4 trillion company just a few months ago. So it's one of the first companies that's ever lost $1 trillion in market cap. So it still is a magnificent seven, plus Broadcom. I think they are still perceived to be dominating, plus Anthropic, plus AI. So you've got these other players entering the game. But just the scale of the the share price movements in the key players themselves and all the sectors that are going to get disrupted. I mean, I've just never seen anything like that Citrini Substack post where every stock that got named in a novel got hit, 5-10%. It's just the market is so skittish. It's so jumping at shadows. It just doesn't know what's going to happen. And everyone is now realizing the impact is going to be enormous, but we haven't actually seen it yet. So it's this giant guessing game. I've just never seen a guessing game like it in 40 years of watching the markets. It's just unprecedented.
That's true. I should preview, I'm doing a 4-part series for the ABC News on AI. I mean, I've been writing about it in Intelligent Investor at great length, and to some extent I'm just kind of summarising what I've been writing for Intelligent Investor on the ABC on the Sunday night news, starting next Sunday, with a look at the decline in the cost of intelligence, or the price of intelligence, and how that has occurred, and what does that mean? It's
beginning to become your new housing. Is there going to be there should be a quarterly essay in this as well? So Alan pivots from the housing king to the AI king.
I offered them a quarterly essay on the subject, and they said, "Oh, we've got someone else doing that, so no thanks."
Bestseller? They've knocked back the bestseller.
No, fair enough. I mean, I don't know who they've got. To be honest, I don't know who they've got, but it's apparently coming out soon.
The problem with it is with something like that, is it's out of date after about a week. So you do a 6-month quarterly essay, and then
I know.
It's just moving too fast.
I know, that's right.
To actually do something in print that's going to hold the test of time. So,
and meanwhile, in Australia, we're arguing about the capital gains tax discount and having a Senate inquiry, which I appeared at on Monday.
You did. Now, so who invited you? Was it the chairman of the committee? Was it the Labor Party attempting to borrow Alan Kohler's credibility to impose a tax hike on the Australian voters? Is that what's going on here?
Well, the committee invited me. I think the chairman is Nick McKim, who was the Greens.
He's the Tassie Green.
Yeah, he's the Green senator. So when I was there were only 3 senators. Andrew Bragg is the Liberal senator. He wasn't there for some reason. And there was Richard Dowling, who's Tasmanian senator for Labor, and Ellie Whiteacre, who was a West Australian senator.
So Alan, 2 Tasmanians and a sandgroper got together to talk about, was it the housing crisis or the CGT or both? Well,
it's a CGT capital gains tax inquiry, but obviously it strays into housing a fair bit. And I made my point that I think the 50% discount is more than it needs to be. In terms of adjusting for inflation, which is what it replaced in 1999, the inflation adjustment had been going since 85, and so I sort of proposed that they shouldn't. It should be half that. But I also think there's an argument to say get rid of it entirely and just tax capital gains in full, nominal capital gains. I mean, that's what Bernie Fraser proposed yesterday. So I think there's an argument for that, because we don't adjust income taxes for inflation at all, either the amount or the tax scales, which were adjusted for inflation for 3 years in the 1970s by Malcolm Fraser, and he gave it away because it removed the ability for him to announce nice tax cuts every now and again. I think that clearly Jim Chalmers and Treasury are thinking about what they're going to do, and there aren't too many options with CGT. Either you reduce the discount to some extent, or you go back to an inflation adjustment.
It's quite complicated. This could be one of those ones where on budget night you do need the lockup, because the new regime applies from midnight that night. Because whenever you change something like an asset tax, you have to change the date that it applies from. So you go back to 1985. This is why I say Rupert Murdoch should never have moved News Corp to Delaware in 2004, because he was sitting on a pre-1985 shareholding, which was tax-free, capital gains tax-free. So if he just stayed in Australia and stayed married to Anna, he'd be sitting on a $30 billion tax-free capital gain in News Corp. So it's going to be quite messy in terms of how they do the change, and it could trigger a lot of asset trading I mean, should you sell your assets now? Should you sell your assets now if suddenly the tax rate's going to effectively be doubled? Because if you're putting it up to effectively, 45%, that is a punitive. If you're going to make 10 million selling a business, you got to give 4.5 million to the government. That's a very high, by global standards, tax rate. Although I presume they reintroduce the inflation adjuster, do they? They have to do that, you'd think. So we just go back to the old system.
I don't think they'll tax the nominal gain. I don't think they'll get rid of the adjustment entirely.
Yeah.
That'd be a big deal. But, yeah, I mean, there's got to be more to it than that. They can't. I mean, that's just in some ways, it's a minor thing. There's plenty more that needs to be done with tax and also with housing. Really, I mean, they've got to think about much more than that. Changing the CGT discount won't do much for housing affordability and won't do much for productivity or taxation in general. I mean, really,
we do need an actual overall package. Bring back Ken Henry. Let's get the whole package. We haven't had a decent package of tax reform since the GST was introduced. And this is just going to be one little nip and tuck at the system, which overall needs a dramatic overall revamp, I would argue. But look, they're going to do something. They're clearly flying the kite. And I reckon they'll announce it on budget night and it'll raise billions. But it's probably fair enough because capital is under tax relative to labour.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of questions, boss. We probably should get on to it.
Before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor.
When it comes to investing, it can pay to be selective. That's the approach the Intelligent Investor Select Value Share Fund takes. It invests only when the price makes sense and steers clear of crowded, over-owned stocks. It applies a disciplined, active approach across Australian and international shares, focusing on long-term value rather than short-term noise. And until Friday, February 27, you can invest in the fund with no brokerage or buy-sell spread costs directly through Intelligent Investor. Visit offer.intelligentinvestor.com.au/IISV to read the offer conditions and see if it's right for you.
Now, Bryn and Tim have both got AI questions. Bryn says, in a future where AI takes many human jobs, what happens to all the debt, e.g. the home loans, as many people will be unemployed and won't be able to make payments? The question can extend to all debt beyond home loans. And Tim says that at the risk of oversimplifying things, won't AI increase productivity by default for most businesses who adopt the tech? If so, given the constant calls for enhanced productivity in Australia, isn't it simply a matter of time before broad AI adoption delivers a lot of those productivity increases that everyone's calling for? What do you think? Stranded assets, debts, financial contagion. People can't repay their debts because they get sacked from AI. I mean, I guess that's any sort of recession or massive increase in unemployment. That's always a big factor, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly true, as for Tim's question, it's certainly true that the AI optimists, including most of the people doing it, are saying that there'll be a massive improvement in productivity and an era of abundance. We'll all have anything we want and it'll all be just great. And so, and that's a feasible scenario for sure. I mean, but obviously, if tons of people lose their jobs, then they're not going to be able to service the mortgage. So, I think to some extent this is a matter of timing in a way. I mean, I've been thinking about it as a bit like house fires. So if your house burns down, you're on your own, really. But if everyone in your town's house burns down because of a bushfire, the government has to step in and help out. And it seems to me that, if one or two people lose their jobs as a result of AI, then they're basically on their own. But if 1 million people lose their jobs, obviously the government's going to have to step in. The trouble is that, there's probably a timing difference between when the government actually does step in and restructure the economy to ensure that all these people can live and don't default on their mortgages. I mean,
and there will be growth. I mean, people forget, like when the iPhone came in, everyone said, it's going to destroy the PC. But there's 2 million jobs globally of people developing apps for the iPhone. So just listening to your Talking Finance last week, which was fascinating, at the end of it, I sort of thought, gee whiz, I can get a whole bunch of AI-generated support people or bots to go along to AGMs on my behalf. So on November 25 last year, I did 11 AGMs on one day. surely in a couple of years' time, I'll have a couple of bots trained up and they'll be able to do all that for me. And I'll just be sitting there training them up to go and lodge the written questions for me at the AGMs online. So
Stephen, you'll be a much more productive pest.
Correct. So the productivity gain is going to be incredible. But I do agree that the white-collar job wipeout and the value destruction in white-collar tech software is going to be pronounced. And that's the scariest thing. But the governments will have to intervene because, as you say, when a massive fire comes along, out comes the checkbook to support the people who've been hit.
Yes. But the question is, at what point does the government do that, really? I mean, and what happens along the way before that happens? And, the answer is I just don't know. And
who's also got the capacity to do it? I mean, if the Americans have suddenly got to pay back their $37 trillion of debt, and there's a crash in the currency, it does come down to your balance sheet strength to actually deal with black swan events or major events. And a lot of people in life don't go along preparing for that sudden health shock. And governments are the same. A lot of them haven't got much in reserve from a balance sheet point of view to step up if there's a crisis. So I think that financial capacity to respond at the corporate, individual and government level will be an interesting thing to watch, and it will be different in different countries.
Max says, as a 35-year-old just starting to build wealth, the proposed changes to reduce the capital gains tax concession from 50% to potentially 33%. Don't know where he gets that from, but yes, that's probably one of the options. Is a bit of a kick in the guts. There are now generations of Australians that aren't rich. This change isn't a wealth tax. As an idea, why not introduce this discount to either gains over a particular value or for those selling over a certain age? Why not actually decrease the discount to 25% or even 0% for certain groups? So it's a genuine wealth tax. Yeah, I suppose so. It's just very, very complicated. I mean, I'm not personally against. I'm not an actual wealth tax. I mean, the problem with wealth taxes is that they by definition don't tax the transaction, so that you've got to have the money for it. If you tax sort of 0.1% of someone's wealth.
Yeah, which is what council rates are the best example of that in Australia. Based on capital improved value. But you can't pick up your house and move it. Whereas a lot of billionaires in San Francisco are moving to Florida or Texas because they don't like this new billionaire tax. So you've always got to watch that you don't introduce a system that's going to drive capital or investment away.
Yeah, as I've been saying, you've got to tax immobile capital because most capital is very mobile. Whether it's the rich person or the digital company, they can operate from anywhere. So that means what's immobile is minerals and housing. So you've got to tax it properly.
I do agree with Max, though, that overall young people and labour is overtaxed. So capital is undertaxed. So, Max would do better if he wasn't paying punitive personal income tax rates. I mean, the top tax rate kicking in at $190,000 is just ridiculously brutal. Bracket creeps smashing everyone. Over $300 billion coming from income tax every year. So hopefully the government will give something back on the income tax front when they do this grab on the capital side. Now, Hugh says, absolutely love the podcast. It means I can talk shop with my corporate mates. You've been banging on about how Australia's productivity levels have fallen, particularly in the construction industry. Your comments about government policy reform really ring in my ears. Why would a small business owner be motivated to work that extra 10% hard when every day I'm hit with stamp duty, crazy levels of insurance, business tax, personal tax, worker benefit schemes, GST confused clients, higher interest rates on business and personal loans? It seems to me like it's just easy to do the bare minimum and walk the dog. What 3 policies would you implement to better motivate Australians to work and innovate? Well, we could do an hour on that one, Alan.
Yeah,
I'd go back to death duties. I'd go hard against the banks. I think the big banks are taking too much value in hitting businesses too hard. I don't like the fact that our big banks are 30% of our market. And I don't know. I'd get the states to tax miners a lot more. What would you do?
I think we've got to tax miners a lot more. I think that, and resources. I think that This is what Ken Henry proposed, which Kevin Rudd tried to introduce. He got rolled on that. Then Julia Gillard's government did introduce it in 2010, and then it was repealed in 2013. So really, I think that there needs to be a much bigger tax on miners, which would lead then to lower taxes on income, particularly income, so that people are more motivated. I think that's the way to go.
All right, boss, your turn.
Nathan says, I agree with Alan that the salary of politicians likely plays an underrated role in their behaviour. Curious as to your thoughts on its impact in keeping the coalition together. How many national shadow ministers, backbenchers, struggle to pay their mortgages during the months when the coalition splits up? Also, spare a thought for the poor AGS payroll officer who has to figure out the prorated salary of the national shadow ministers during the off weeks. Yeah, look, I think you're right. I actually do. I was thinking that that these nationals senior people get pay bumps when they become shadow ministers, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think that's an important part of it.
Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. So and Nathan is right. The incentive is therefore for the nationals to stay in the coalition and for their leaders to be paid more as shadow ministers.
And in particular for the leader of the Nationals, the leader of the Nationals becomes Deputy Prime Minister, which is a big pay bump. I don't know what he gets, but I'm sure that it's a fair bit more than he would as a backbencher.
It also plays into leadership challenges because the challenger who'll be sitting on the backbench not earning much can then promise a whole bunch of fellow backbenchers a ministerial job and a pay rise.
Yeah.
So you've often got payroll management is a way of executing a coup and clinging onto your job. So vote for me and you can keep the whip's job, son. If the other guy gets it, then you'll be out and you'll lose $100K a year. That's a big driver in all this stuff.
Well, and I think if anyone's wondering how much of an incentive or a driver this provides on politicians, think about how does it motivate you? How does your salary and improving it motivate or change your behaviour? Because I think that it's pretty universal.
Well, self-interest. I mean, people are sucking up to Trump because it's in their financial interest. They hate doing it. They feel terrible about it, but they're just acting rationally to preserve their shareholders and personal positions and reputation and profits. That's just life with the incentives in a capitalist system. So now Justin says, long-time listener, first-time caller, love the show. I recently did a deep dive on why long-term mortgages aren't available in Australia after the last rate rise. The question: could Australia, with structural reforms, establish an active long-term debt market and adopt Denmark's balance principle mortgage bonds and use this also to fund our growth? So why don't we have long-term mortgages in Australia, Alan? Do we need a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac?
Well, we do, and in order to write my quarterly essay on housing, I investigated this, and 30-year mortgages were introduced in the US when they created Fannie Mae, which is the Federal Mortgage Association. And the job of the Fannie Mae was and still is to buy mortgages off banks to provide them with liquidity, because the problem with 30-year mortgages provided by banks is that locks them into lending money for a long term, but most of their deposits, the money they get in, is short term. And so it just increases the risk of the banks. And the thing is that when that was done in the 1930s in the United States, the US had a Democrat president and we had a conservative prime minister, conservative government. And we didn't follow suit, didn't do it.
We leave it to the market, and the Aussie market.
And by the time Labor got in, which was I think 1941, it was in the middle of the war, so nobody really thought about anything else but the war. And so, and then the moment passed, and Menzies got in, and nobody was interested in doing it. So, could we do it in other ways? I'm not sure whether, and to be honest, I don't know what Denmark's balance principle mortgage bonds are.
The problem with doing it was that there could be an element of nationalisation of the banking service. I mean, at the end of the day, our states and federal government can and do borrow 10, 20, 30-year money. So if they can borrow 10, 20, 30-year money, why can't they own lend it to people for their most important thing, a roof over their head, and line up those long-term loans from the markets to their people so they can have some certainty on what they're paying on their mortgage. Instead, everyone's sitting there watching the headlines, terrified that their mortgage rate is going to change because you can't buy you can get some fixed term loans, but it's nothing like the American long-term system, which is far better. Let's be honest. It's a better system. You can sleep at night. You can make long-term plans.
It has a couple of impacts, sort of not unintended, but certainly not directly associated with the mortgages. One is that it discourages people from selling their house because they then have to start a new mortgage, and it reduces the amount of stamp duty. It would reduce the amount of stamp duty revenue of the states, and secondly, it makes monetary policy not work very well. In the US, when the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, it doesn't have much of an impact on consumers, mortgage holders, because most people are sitting on 30-year mortgages and it doesn't make any difference to what they're repaying. Whereas in Australia, there's an instant transmission of rate cuts or rate hikes because the mortgages are set against or set to the cash rate that the RBA does. So the variable mortgage rate moves up and down very quickly. And we're all sitting around wondering, will the banks pass on the rate cuts and the rate hikes or not? And in the US, that doesn't matter. So in the US, monetary policy tends to work mainly on businesses where their loans are much more variable and set according to the Fed funds rate.
Now let's move on to question 8 from Tony. I was shocked to hear James say on this last week's podcast that, quote, we're producing too many electric vehicles and they are being stockpiled everywhere in Australia. For a second, I thought it was his pitch to join the pay TV channel formerly known as Sky News. Do you agree that the sheer weight of the economic benefit, let alone the emission reductions, will lead to a more rapid transition to EVs than many are predicting? Or will the scare campaigns, driven in many cases by the entrenched ICE manufacturers, prevail for a while yet? I think the flood of EVs is a good thing. And it just becomes more price competitive. And so it will drive take-up at a time globally when subsidies from governments are being wound back. So we've moved from a government subsidy of EV model to a Chinese subsidy of EV because they're manufacturing millions of EVs, some would say at a loss or a limited profit, and flooding the world's markets with them. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, I agree. I think that EVs, everyone will end up driving an electric vehicle for sure. I've got an EV, and one of the interesting consequences of having an EV is that you don't really know what it's costing you to run. I mean, when you had a petrol car, you know exactly how much it costs to fill it up. And, every few weeks you'd have to go and do it, and there you'd see it. You'd see the amount of money that's putting into it. With EVs, you're connected to your electricity every night, and it obviously increases your electricity bill, but you don't know what it is. So it actually feels like it's costing you nothing. And nobody, I've thought about it and tried to think about what it's costing me in the extra electricity, but it's completely impossible. You've got no idea. So it feels a bit like it costs you nothing because, your electricity bill is probably higher, but who knows?
Well, whatever the case is, it's costing you less than if you were using fuel, but some would argue there can be an inconvenience of the amount of time it takes to charge. There's issues with supply chain and getting parts. There's issues with resale values. Supposedly the EV cars have been falling faster than the traditional cars, but overall, I think there's little doubt that you'll be in front.
It's definitely not inconvenient.
If you drive an EV.
It's definitely not inconvenient. I just plug it in overnight and, drive off in the morning. It's fine.
Away you go.
But the other thing I think is worth mentioning is that I reckon that eventually, possibly 10 years, I don't know when, we won't be driving cars at all. We'll be sitting in the back seat while they drive us.
EV cars will be driving us, correct.
Because apart from anything else, the insurance will be lower because they don't have accidents. Self-driving cars, they don't bash into each other, and so I think that we'll be sitting in the back seat, letting the car drive us because it'll cost less in insurance.
I agree. Absolutely right. All right, your turn, boss.
What else can we go with?
What about Mark? Mark's asking, let's have some merch. Love the show. So can we get some Money Cafe merch, Alan?
Well, I'm told, and I'm not directly involved in this, I'm told, watch this space. We're working on something behind the scenes. So who knows?
Very exciting.
Kendall says, why are interest rates used to manage inflation? Recent news articles say only 1/3 of Australians have a mortgage, which means raising interest rates only affects 1/3 of Australians. Then who is controlling the other 2/3 Australians are spending? Interest rates just lead to the more profit for the banks and their shareholders. Those with an interest in the banks are unlikely to be those with mortgages because they can't afford bank shares. So the rich get richer and keep spending, which doesn't help inflation. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the whole basis of monetary policy is that the people who have a mortgage cut back more than the people who don't have a mortgage increase their spending. So
but it also has a business impact. Like it's meant if the economy's overheating because there's too much business activity, too much speculation, too much capital investment, driving up costs of supplies, etc. It's meant to slow down business activity because for businesses they've got to pay more money to take out a loan to build that new factory. So it's not just households and mortgages. It is meant to slow the economy so it doesn't overheat, triggering inflation. I think you can't lose it. I mean, Kendall's point is right, and it benefits those with cash because they get more on their term deposits. But it does slow down business as well, which is what the government is trying to do, or the Reserve Bank's trying to do. Now, Douglas says, I was just listening to last week's podcast and the listener's question about physical gold. You commented that an ETF is exactly the same as physical gold, but there's a key point you missed, counterparty risk. Physical gold has no counterparty risk, whereas every electronic version, ETFs, gold, which is gold stored on your behalf, blockchain gold, etc., has a counterparty that introduces a risk element to the mix. That's why central banks buy physical gold and store it themselves. What do you think, boss?
Well, it's obviously right in theory. The problem is that the physical gold price that you buy and sell for is set according to the paper gold price. I mean, it's not a separate market. The ABC Bullion and the Perth Mint that buy and sell gold, physical gold, set the price according to the spot market and the futures market, as I was explaining. So it's sort of it's true, except that they're linked.
And also physical gold, well, there's a risk that your gold's going to get stolen. So that's a risk that doesn't exist with the ETF. You've got to store it. You've got to insure it. If there's a robbery, you've got to buy big safes. So there's actually costs around holding physical gold. And our institutions are very, very sophisticated. I mean, when did the last gold ETF actually default? It's like saying there's a counterparty risk if I take a mortgage out with the Commonwealth Bank because the Commonwealth Bank could go broke. Well, yes, it's a theoretical risk, but is it really going to eventuate? I would say unlikely with credible sellers of gold ETFs.
Also, if you've got a mortgage with the Commonwealth Bank and they go broke, you've got their money. It's fine. The problem is if you've given them your money.
Yes. Now, Nathan says, I loved Alan's quick rundown of all the cost categories that collapsed in each industrial revolution: textile labour, transport, communication, and now intelligence. As investors, we're looking to what's next. So what's the next cost to collapse? Is it energy? If so, where should we invest, or is it still too early, or will private capital continue to capture the big gains? So that goes to your 4-part series, doesn't it, Alan, on the collapsing cost of intelligence with the rollout of AI.
It is interesting about talking about energy cost because the cost of energy is collapsing now. I mean, solar and wind, in particular solar, is the lowest cost of energy. It's not falling to zero because of the cost of building the solar panels, but they've collapsed in price. The cost of PV, photovoltaic cells, has collapsed mainly because of what China is up to. And the next step with energy possibly is fusion energy. I mean, there's a lot of people close to coming up with fusion, which is a new form of nuclear, which is potentially very cheap and perpetual. So, I think that's an interesting point about the falling cost of energy. which could keep falling if the price of photovoltaic cells. And now they're talking about having them in space, not just data centers, but actual kind of solar arrays as satellites collecting energy from the sun. And the reason it's potentially cheaper there, is because it runs 24 hours a day rather than just when the sun's, when it's daytime. And it's much closer to the sun, so it gets unadulterated sun rays that don't have to go through the atmosphere. So there's a lot of talk about that. I don't know if that'll actually happen, because you've got to then convert it into microwaves, which get beamed to Earth and collected in microwave collection centres, and then get turned back into electricity. So it's all and you've got to pay for the rocket to go up. So that's expensive as well. So I haven't seen any cost estimate of what that power will cost, but
and even with intelligence, $700 billion in capital expenditure by the Magnificent Seven and a couple of others is the largest ever capital expenditure in history to provide cheap intelligence to everyone else. So there's still a big cost in delivering that cheap intelligence. But certainly, it's certainly coming.
Just briefly, what usually happens with those big capex events that we're seeing now and have seen in the past is that there's a big stock market bust and everyone goes broke and the capital's lost and everyone starts again.
Well, I think, yes, you usually lose money in that capital-intensive phase. So, but often at the end of it, it can turn into a bonanza. And that was like the tech wreck. There was a lot of investment. A lot of the fibre went bad, but a lot of the other tech investment, a lot of companies went broke, but ultimately the Googles and the Facebooks of the world and the Microsofts emerged more powerful than any corporates we've ever seen. And still, even today with so-called SaaS flash crash, they're still worth more than 20 billion, those big Magnificent Seven tech stocks, even as some of them are going to negative cash flow, like Amazon, and even as they're going to spend $700 billion this year, up from $400 billion US last year. Like, we've never seen any spending like it, but it's been done by companies that have never been as rich and powerful as capitalism has produced. So it's all unprecedented stuff. Now, time for one more, Alan. You can choose it.
Long-term listener says, I listened to a talk recently, the lack of measured productivity in the burgeoning care sector. Nobody ever discusses how the bulk of care provided in Australia is unpaid and usually by women staying at home, as it has been for generations. It just isn't measured. Discuss. Well, yes, that's true. I don't think that's ever going to be measured, really. I don't think it's going to... it's true, but it's not going to happen. So,
Both things are true, aren't they? The cost of the care sector, the care sector is a growing sector in the economy. Nursing homes, childcare, there's a lot more people in it being paid, but there's also an enormous amount of people in it doing it as volunteers, and has been forever thus. I don't know how you can measure it.
And I think the question is also talking about people looking after, disabled people at home or old people at home, who aren't in an institution and not part of the ABS measured system, and they're not being measured either. So yeah, I think that's true. But I do wonder at what point we start having robots doing the work.
I think it's going to be a big factor. So, but we've never spent more from a government spending point of view. Just look at the NDIS. It's absolutely enormous, and the growth in the childcare sector and the aged care sector have also been enormous. And maybe there is a productivity issue in the paid professional element of that sector. But absolutely right, there is an enormous amount of work being done that's unpaid and not measured, and it should be discussed more. Long-time listeners, so I agree with you.
And that's it for today. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening to today's episode of the Money Café. I'll be back next week with Stephen Mayne again. So I can't wait for that, Stephen.
See you in the cafe, boss, this time. Looking forward to it.
Send in your question and we'll answer it. So unfortunately, we're getting so many questions, we can't answer them all. Like today, I think we answered about half the questions. Maybe we should do an Easter special where we just do questions for an hour or something. What do you think, Stephen?
I'd support that. Other podcasts do that. They have a debate podcast and then they have a questions podcast, totally separate. So,
right.
But we're getting so many, 20 plus a week now, so it's quite hard to... And they're all great questions too. So keep sending them in. Don't lose heart if we don't read your question out. Keep going.
keep going, but we'll try it. I'll see if I'll talk to James about it, see if we can get him lined up for a special with the three of us doing nothing but answer questions.
A questions festival, that'd be great.
All right, okay. Till next week, I'm Alan Kohler, Editor-at-Large of Intelligent Investor.
And I'm Stephen Mayne, and we'll see you next week.